The wind on the Oklahoma plains in 1945 did not blow so much as it scoured. It carried the red dust of the American interior, a grit that settled into the pores and coated the lungs. For the group of German women standing nervously inside the barbed wire perimeter of the prisoner of war camp, the landscape was as alien as the surface of the moon. They were thousands of miles from the crumbling masonry of Berlin or the burning skylines of Dresden. They were prisoners of the United States Army, captured amidst the chaotic collapse of the Third Reich, and transported across an ocean patrolled by the very U-boats their nation had hailed as invincible. They were tired, filthy, and terrified. But their terror was not born of the vast, open horizon or the stern-faced GIs guarding them with rifles slung over their shoulders. Their terror was internal, a suffocating cocktail of Nazi propaganda and the horrific rumors that had whispered through the ranks of the Wehrmacht in the war's final months. When the order came, it was simple, barked in broken German by a young American sergeant. Get in the showers, use the soap, clean yourselves up. To the American guards, this was a routine hygiene protocol. To the German women, it was a sentence of death, or worse. The incident that followed would not only expose the psychological ruins of a brainwashed generation but also reveal the devastating, tangible truth about the conditions in a collapsing Nazi Germany, a truth that could be held in the palm of a hand. The shadow of the RAF. To understand the panic that seized the women in that Oklahoma shower block, one must understand the reality they had left behind. By 1945, Germany was a hollow shell. The Allied bombing campaigns had obliterated infrastructure, supply lines were severed, and the German economy had reverted to a feral state of scavenging. Basic necessities, bread, fuel, medicine were memories. Cleanliness was a luxury of the past. But the shortage of soap in Germany had birthed something far darker than mere grime. It had birthed a macabre rumor that had seeped into the collective consciousness of the German people, a horror story whispered in bomb shelters and barracks. The standard issue soap in Germany, a gritty clay-filled substitute that barely later was stamped with the letters RIF Reichsstall für Industrielle Fettversorgung, National Center for Industrial Fat Provisioning. However, in the paranoid, guilt-ridden atmosphere of a nation committing industrial genocide, the rumors spread that RIF actually stood for Reins, Judisches Fettpure, Jewish fat. The belief that the regime was manufacturing soap from the bodies of its victims was a jagged shard of psychological horror that many Germans carried with them. Whether they believed it fully or just feared it, the bar of soap had transformed from a symbol of hygiene into a symbol of atrocity. Furthermore, the very concept of a mass shower had been irredeemably corrupted. For those who knew, or suspected, the dark secrets of the East, a group shower was not for cleansing. It was the last room one entered before the gas. So, when the American guards in Oklahoma ushered the women into the tiled room and handed them bars of creamy white soap, the women did not see benevolence. They saw the final confirmation of their own propaganda. They believed the Americans, the gangsters of the West as Goebbels had painted them, were about to inflict upon them the very horrors Germany had inflicted upon others. The scent of lavender and truth. The women stood in the shower room, trembling. Some wept silently, others clutched each other waiting for the gas or the burning chemical spray. They held the bars of soap like grenades. Then one of them turned the handle. Water, hot and steaming, hissed from the pipes. Real water, not gas, not acid. Hesitantly, a woman brought the bar of soap to her nose. She inhaled. It didn't smell of chemicals, or clay, or death. It smelled of lavender. It smelled of tallow and perfume. It was Ivory or Palmolive mass-produced commercial American soap. She rubbed it against her skin. It lathered rich, thick white bubbles cascaded over her grime-streaked arms. The reaction was instant and visceral. The women did not cheer. They broke down. They collapsed onto the wet tiles, sobbing uncontrollably. The American guards, initially confused by the hysteria, watched in awkward silence as the realization hit the prisoners. This bar of soap was the devastating truth. In 1945, fat was the most precious commodity in Europe. Germany was starving for it. There was no butter, no oil, no lard, People were boiling bones to skim grease. If the Americans could afford to mass-produce millions of bars of high-quality, fat-based soap and hand them out freely to their enemies, then the war had been lost long ago. The soap revealed the lie of the NSIG final victory. It proved that the United States was not a crumbling, degenerate society as Hitler had claimed, but a nation of such overwhelming industrial abundance that it could wash its prisoners in luxury that a German general couldn't obtain in Berlin. The soap washed away the grime of the journey, but it also washed away the last clinging remnants of their ideological faith. They were not being exterminated, they were being cleaned. The Fritz Ritz and the Golden Cage. This incident in the shower room was the gateway to a broader, surreal experience shared by the 370,000 German POWs held in the United States during the war. The camps, scattered across Texas, Oklahoma, and the Midwest, were colloquially known as the Fritz Ritz. The conditions in these camps were a shocking inversion of the European nightmare. In Germany, a soldier might fight for a week on a piece of moldy bread and a bowl of watery turnip soup. In Oklahoma, the POWs were fed according to the Geneva Convention, which mandated that prisoners must eat the same quality of rations as the captor's own troops. For the German women and men, this meant white bread, beef, potatoes, vegetables, milk and eggs. The sheer caloric intake was overwhelming for digestive systems accustomed to starvation. They gained weight. They slept in beds with clean sheets. They were given medical care by doctors who had penicillin, a miracle drug virtually unknown in the world. The humanity in unexpected places mentioned in the prompt was found here. In the strained relationship between the captors and the captives, the American guards, often farm boys from the Midwest, harbored little of the visceral, blood-feud hatred that defined the Eastern Front. To them, the prisoners were just people who had to be watched. There are recorded instances of guards sharing cigarettes, teaching prisoners baseball, and even allowing them to listen to the radio. In the Oklahoma camps, prisoners were often hired out to local farms to help with the harvest due to the labor shortage caused by the draft. German soldiers who had been told that Americans were soulless capitalists found themselves sitting at dinner tables with Oklahoma families, eating corn on the cob and discussing the weather in broken English. For the women, the psychological pivot was profound. They had been told that American soldiers were rapists and brutes. Instead, they found themselves in a system that, while strict, respected their bodily autonomy and dignity. The contrast between the behavior of the enemy and the behavior of their own regime was a cognitive dissonance that broke their loyalty to the swastika more effectively than any interrogation. The devastating truth of collapse, the soap incident also highlighted the total moral and physical collapse of the German home front. Back in Germany, the conditions were apocalyptic. As the Allies advanced, the social fabric disintegrated. Women were indeed subjected to mass sexual violence, particularly in the East. And the struggle for survival had reduced life to a primal competition for food. The rubble women trummerfroen were clearing millions of tons of debris with their bare hands, starving while they worked. When the POWs in Oklahoma wrote letters home, their families often didn't believe them. A prisoner might describe having meat for dinner and a hot shower with soap. The census-stamped letters arriving in a bombed-out cellar in Hamburg read like fantasy fiction. Many German families assumed the prisoners were being forced to write these lies as propaganda. They could not conceive of a world where soap was free and meat was plentiful. This disconnect reveals the tragedy of the German situation in 1945. The people had been so thoroughly isolated by censorship and lies that the truth that the rest of the world was not living in a cave was incomprehensible. The soap in the Oklahoma camp was a tangible piece of reality that pierced the bubble. Humanity in the details. The story of the German women in the soap is poignant because it locates humanity in the mundane. War is usually narrated through the lens of battles, treaties, and generals. But for the individual caught in the gears of history, the war is experienced through the senses, the gnawing in the stomach, the itch of lice, the smell of cordite, and, conversely, peace is felt through the senses, the smell of lavender, the warmth of water, the taste of white bread. The American guards who ordered the women to shower were likely unaware of the deep psychological terror they were triggering. They were just following the army manual on hygiene. But when they saw the reaction, the fear turning to relief, the sobbing over a bar of soap. Many of them glimpsed the true nature of the enemy they were fighting. They saw that these were not monsters, but human beings who had been abused, lied to, and starved by their own leaders. It was a moment of shared humanity. The guard, perhaps feeling a pang of awkward sympathy, might have looked away to give the women privacy. The women, scrubbing the dust of the journey from their skin, were washing away the master race myth to reveal the frightened, grateful humans underneath. The legacy of the cleanse. In the years that followed, many German POWs who had been held in the US returned to a devastated Germany with a profound pro-American sentiment. They had seen the land of plenty not through a telescope, but through the window of a barracks. They had tasted its food and used its soap. They became the bridge builders of the post-war era, the generation that helped align West Germany with democracy. The women in the Oklahoma camp eventually returned home. They went back to a land of ruins, where they had to rebuild their lives from scratch. But one suspects that for the rest of their lives, the simple act of unwrapping a bar of soap carried a heavy, secret memory. It was a memory of the day the world didn't end. A memory of the day they stood naked in a room thousands of miles from home, expecting death, and were given, instead, the simple, startling grace of being clean. The story reminds us that in the darkest chapters of human history, the most powerful weapon against hatred is often not a gun, but a display of basic dignity. The devastating truth revealed in that camp was that the Nazis had lied about everything, but most importantly, they had lied about the scarcity of humanity in the world. In the dusty plains of Oklahoma, amidst the barbed wire, the enemy offered a bar of soap, and in doing so, offered a way back to the human race.